Hello and welcome to the Identity Love Podcast, episode number 3. I am Tracy. I am a life coach and identity specialist for folks who have lost themselves in their relationships and they don't know who they are or how to be themselves. So first of all, I want to let you know that there is a video version of this on YouTube if you're not watching it already, and there is an audio version on Spotify in case you prefer to listen. So go check that out. Also, if you are listening to the podcast for the first time, first of all, welcome. Secondly, I want to tell you that it would probably help to listen to the first 2 episodes before you listen to this one. Of course, you can totally listen to this one and get a lot out of it, but it would make a lot more sense if you go back and listen to the first 2. Okay, so this episode is about tying everything that I talked about in episode number 1 and 2 and giving you a real life example of how this works and how I use this idea of my coolest self in my life to change my relationships and my entire life. So I use this coolest self approach in 2 different relationships consecutively. And one was a relationship that was becoming very unhealthy. And I felt like I couldn't leave it. Even if deep down inside, I knew that it was going bad. I myself felt so reliant on the relationship and on him that I could not bring myself to leave it. And the second relationship is one that was much healthier, but I still found myself relying and just grasping and trying to make myself better for him, falling into all the old habits. And I used this coolest self approach for both of these relationships and changed both of them. So no matter where you are right now, this can help you out. So in both relationships, I felt like I had tried everything. I'm sure you can relate to this. I looked at everything that he liked. I looked at where I could be better for him, do nicer things for him, where I could please him more. It was basically just the partner pleasing hamster wheel. That's what I was on. By the way, I have a free training for how to get off this partner pleasing hamster wheel at my website, identitylove.com. But in both cases, I had definitely just started to feel the anxiety that they didn't love me enough. I wasn't enough for them. I was lacking in some way. I was just very anxious and needy and easily jealous and feeling crazy, basically. And so in the unhealthy one, I would get mad at him. I try to set the record straight, usually when I was drunk and just completely acting out, because that was the only time that I felt I could give myself permission to actually have emotions. And then he'd get pissed off and leave, and I'd always come crawling back because I realized, oh my God, I don't know who I am without him. I need him in my life. I need him back here. So I would always come back. And I felt like I could not live without him. I literally felt like that. And then in the healthy relationship, I was just falling into the old patterns where I was obsessing over him, trying to make myself good enough for him, all those things, always thinking that I'm not enough, always worrying about if he wants someone else, if he doesn't actually love me. And I was kind of ruining something that was actually good. So in both cases, I knew that I had a problem, that I needed to work on this myself, and something needed to be done because I had tried everything else. And the one thing that I had not yet tried was, and I looked on Google, because if you were like me, you've Googled this and said, how can I improve my relationship tips, how to be a better partner, all that stuff. And the one thing that I had not yet tried was the part where they're like, you have to love yourself. And you have to have your own life, and you have to be feeling good about who you are first on your own. And I kept coming across this and all the different Google lists, all the BuzzFeed stuff, all the things where I would Google it and I would be like, man, that's the one thing I have to admit I have not tried. And for years and years, I avoided this because I thought, I don't hate myself. I like lots of things about myself. I don't think that self-love is a problem. I think it's that I just need to do more for him. So it wasn't until I reached this breaking point where I was just completely desperate. I didn't know what else there was to do. And I was like, you know what haven't I not tried yet? What is the one thing I could try? And the one thing that I hadn't tried yet was the self-love thing. So it was out of this desperation that I said, okay, how do I do this self-love thing? How do I do this? I felt it was gross. I felt it was disgusting. I was like, ugh, loving myself? I just thought, you know what? I'm humble. And I don't need to love myself like that. I don't need to feel like, oh, I'm so great. But of course, I realized over time that self-love felt completely different from that. It felt like feeling good about who you are. It felt more than just being okay with yourself. It was liking who you were. And not just parts of myself like, oh, I like that I'm creative and I like that I'm a nice person. It was more than that. It was about actually liking myself so that I wasn't 100% dependent on someone else liking me for me to feel good. So I started to step back because I was hell-bent on doing this one thing that I hadn't tried yet. And I was like, I have to try this for this relationship to make it work, because if it doesn't work, then at least I knew I tried everything. And so I started thinking. I was like, well, if I don't feel love towards myself, why would that be? I can't just believe that it's just who I am, because I want to believe that I can change this. I want to believe that I can do this last thing I haven't tried. So I began to think, how do I act when I'm trying to get someone else's love? Obviously, I go to all the extents to try to figure out what it is that they're most attracted to and to be more of that for them, be nicer to them, be better to them, look better, act better, be more compatible. And so when I was looking at how I was treating myself, for me to be going out there, abandoning my identity, treating myself like crap, not believing in myself, always abandoning myself to go and do something better for partners, never listening to myself, always comparing myself to everyone else, always putting myself last. It was more like I was abandoning myself and being at war with myself than anything else. And so I realized, of course, I don't feel love towards myself. Why would I love myself if I'm treating myself like crap and shoving my emotions under the rug and basically ignoring myself for my relationship? I was not at peace with the way that I was operating. I felt very boring and unattractive and angry at myself because I was not at peace with the way that I was being, with how I was treating myself. So I realized I know how so well to look at someone else and try really hard to be better for them, to be more attractive for them. If I'm so great at that, what is stopping me from logically just doing the same thing for myself? Trying hard to be attractive to myself. Then logically it tracks that I would feel more love towards myself when I'm actually trying to be someone attractive for me. I cannot do this final piece, this self-love piece, and try it out until I figure out how to love myself. And in order to love myself, I have to be somebody that I think is not at war with myself, someone who I feel at peace with, someone who I feel congruent with. I feel like I like myself. I like being with myself. And that was absolutely not what I had been doing up until then. I've been trying so hard all these years to be this cool person, the version of cool, for him, for his taste, for what I thought he wanted. What would be my version of that if I was trying super hard to be cool for just me, for just my own tastes, my own preferences? What would I be attracted to? What do I find attractive as a person, as a personality, as in my own life? What am I attracted to? What version of myself would I feel attracted to? So that's why in episode 1 and 2, I go over this. And I did all these things to start paying attention to what I felt inspired by, to see what I was actually attracted to. So I did a lot of this exploring, a lot of this moving into inspiration, focusing on what I felt inspired by, inexplicably pulled towards. Instead of this fear and pressure and focusing on him, I just began collecting all the inspiration and things that I actually liked, my muses. Back then I didn't have Pinterest, but I just looked online and started to collect photos of all these different things that inspired me. And it did take time and energy. Yes. But in doing this, putting my focus on myself, I was actually able to take away so much of that obsession. Because think about how much time and energy and focus we put towards this other person. And when we take some of that focus back and spend more time focused on noticing what we like, our inspirations, we can reroute that energy and focus that we've been putting on them for ourselves. So once I rerouted it a little bit more towards me, I found out, okay, I have the energy for this. And what I noticed is that I actually felt relief when I started to do this, because in comparison to how it felt before, where I had so much pressure and I was essentially trying to control this thing that I don't have full control over, which is how the relationship goes, because parts of it is dependent on him and how he's acting and how he's feeling towards me. And I spent all my time trying to control this thing that I didn't have full control over, which is why I felt anxious and depleted so much of the time. So it was such a relief to focus back onto myself and notice that I am allowed to focus on myself if I'm going to go and do this thing that I haven't done before, the self-love thing, and that I could just focus on what I had control over, which was myself. To know that I was allowed to do this because this was required, like focusing on myself was required to actually change and improve my situation. It felt like such a relief that like, oh my God, I don't have to actually focus on this thing out there that I can't control. And it feels like I'm riding like this wild roller coaster or this bucking bronco where I just am out of control and am just anxious all the time and full of fear and comparison and all of that. It felt like such a relief to come back to myself and just say, okay, all I have to focus on is myself right now, what I like this needs to be my main focus. And it felt like a relief, which actually felt scary because I felt like I was doing something wrong. But I want you to know that that is a common feeling, and you are going to feel a little guilty, a little weird for doing it for the first time, but it is required to do this piece that you haven't done yet and that you are doing for yourself and for your relationship. So it is required. Okay, so now that I knew who I looked up to, what I thought was cool, I didn't have a lot of inspirations, but I had some bare bones, some things. And so I looked at what I was inspired by, my muses. Who did I think was super cool? And a lot of it, I had mentioned Catwoman before. Got an art piece right here. I was into these action hero, independent, kind of like the Angelina Jolie type characters, like Tomb Raider, independent, strong, badass, female action hero babe characters. And that was something I was always drawn to. So I took notice of that. And I was also drawn to something that felt completely opposite, which was the Bjork kind of thing, which I talked about in episode 1. And these colorful, creative, expressive, weird, like inexplicable, free-flowing artist types who are leading these colorful, anything goes lives. And so those are my two main inspirations. I was like, I am drawn to the action hero babes, and I am drawn to the free-flowing, colorful artists. Those are my two inspirations, my two main muses. And so this is important information about myself. There's a reason why I am drawn to this, drawn to these particular types of people. And so I had to dig in and say, what is so special? What is so cool about them? What makes them cool to me? And I realized that for the action hero babes, it was that they were just going through life, doing what they wanted to do and having a mission, and they were getting stuff done. They were efficient. They didn't need anybody else. They're able to go forth and just kick ass and deal with whatever came their way. And they showed up and they did this mission that meant a lot to them. That's what I thought was cool. That's what my soul was drawn to. It wasn't necessarily about how they dressed or exactly what missions they were doing, right? Because it's not like I'm going to go and raid tombs or go cat burglarize, right? It was about those qualities. So I looked at what the exact special qualities were. And so same with the artists. What I was so drawn to was that they were busy just doing their creativity and expressing themselves unabashedly and doing whatever they wanted, essentially. They were doing what brought them joy. They were leading an inspired life that was unique and different and looked exactly like who they are. It wasn't a cookie cutter thing. They weren't copying anybody else. They were simply expressing themselves freely, which is also why I liked that guy in high school that I talked about in episode 2, where I was drawn to the way he was expressing himself and just putting all these different things together. So you look at the qualities, the energy they have. What is the vibe that you're drawn to? What are their priorities, their values, right? So the action hero babes, they valued efficiency. They valued having a mission. They valued being the best they could to focus on their mission and to be good at it and to take pride in it. And mindset, right? How do they think? I was like, wow. So they think they're very just like, I'm here to get stuff done. I'm good at what I do. What's important in life is to have a mission and to do what you believe in and to do it well and to fight till the very end to do it right. And the artists, their vibe, their mindset and their priorities and values was to express themselves. They're like, life is about being free. Life is about enjoying what's around you and being inspired and being creative when you feel called to be creative and doing whatever you want and being free and just living life as yourself. So I was like, okay, I got the vibes, I got the priorities, I got the mindset. And so once I filtered that out and I figured out exactly what those were, I began to look at the gap between their energy, their priorities and values, their mindset, and my own. I was like, okay, it's completely different, right? I was like, here I am at home, just waiting around, waiting for him to prompt me, to tell me what I should like, to tell me what I should be interested in, to tell me how I should feel, what I should focus on. I was doing the exact opposite pretty much. I wasn't going out having my own life. I wasn't having my own mission. I wasn't out just creating whenever I wanted to and feeling free. So notice that when you are looking at what your muses represent to you, they are showing you where your soul is yearning to branch out into, what your soul is missing, what your soul is telling you, hey, you need to be more of this because this is not you. And so, okay, if these people who have this energy, these priorities and values and this mindset, if they were in my situation, so basically if they were living my life in my relationship, how would they do it differently than me? What would be different, right? With that energy and that mindset and those priorities, what would change? So I was looking at that and I was like, oh my God, so much stuff. I wouldn't just be sitting around at home waiting. I'd be out pursuing new things. I'd be on my own mission. I'd see my life as a mission. I'd have all these different goals that I'm constantly working towards and trying to be very efficient in and trying to get stuff done well and right and taking pride in how I go through my life and setting it up in a way that's efficient and beneficial for me to do my mission. And I would be more expressive. I would go with the flow more. I would go and do things that inspired me more. And I would be more focused on just living life. Like my muses would never be sitting around being sad, waiting, looking to see when my partner's going to bed. So then they're like, okay, I guess it's bedtime. Oh my gosh, it would be so different. So one little caveat that I want to say is that when you're looking at the gap between what your muses are doing and what you're not doing, when you're looking at the gap between yourself and your muses, this isn't to shame you or make you feel like, oh my gosh, I have to live up into this impossible standard, yet another impossible standard. This is not what it is. This is using them as a guide and as something that shows you more of yourself. Okay, so their qualities, the stuff you like about them is meant to guide you. It's not to hold at this impossible standard and make yourself feel shitty, because that's what we've been doing this whole time. So we're not going to do that. So what we got to do here is use these things as a guide. So I said, okay, I see clearly now why I don't feel good towards myself, why I don't have this natural self-love, because I'm not doing these things that my soul is actually feeling called to do. And I'm doing all these things that I think I'm doing for the good of myself and for the relationship, but it's actually not doing any good at all. And it doesn't make sense to me. So that's why I feel so much conflict within myself. So I just had to start doing little doable things in my life that didn't stress me out. I didn't have to go and feel like I had to change myself completely overnight. But now that I saw a clear glimpse of what my cooler version of myself that I would prefer to be and feel more inspired and true being, now that I saw what that was, I began seeing little pieces where I'm like, I could do a little bit more of this here, or I could do that a little differently, right? So I'm using them as a guide, but I'm still being myself. I'm working it into my life. I'm seeing how I can apply these bits of wisdom from my inspirations into my own life. Okay, so it's not like you have to hold yourself to be exactly like them. It is that you're using them as a guide to integrate into yourself, to see where you can start adjusting yourself and living more true to that than how you have before. So how I started to integrate this into my life was that, like I said, the Pinterest boards, the inspiration, I wrote down all these qualities and the energy and the mindset of my cooler self, of who I would be if I was a little bit more like my muses. And I would write down the different actions. And I even had certain songs. I made like a soundtrack playlist that I would change and add into over time, but I would listen to it while reading these things and looking at these images that inspired me. And it was giving myself a sacred moment to be immersed in my own inspiration and have time with this vision of my cooler self. And this is so important because when you think about it, we are immersed from the moment we wake up in society, in our relationship, around other people. And we are immersed in this world that is so loud and telling us who we should be, that it is so important to have moments where we immerse ourselves in who we want to be. So that's what I did. And the more that I did that, the more that I was able to get into character, so to speak, because I was getting clear with myself and I was envisioning this other version of myself and I was pointing myself in that direction. So it was kind of like getting into character. Listening to the music was like getting into character a little bit. And so when stuff happened in life, I would think back to my cooler self, my muses, and I would start to make small, doable changes in my life that were more aligned to those things. So for example, if my partner was working and I was normally just sitting at home waiting for him, and I wouldn't go out if someone invited me out because I was like, no, I can't, gotta wait for him. I don't want to go out anyway unless he's there. If someone invited me out, I'd be like, you know what? Yeah, my cooler self would totally go out. She'd go out. And so I started doing little things like that. Started going out more when he wasn't there. I started noticing how much my life revolved around his influence. And I started to notice when I actually wanted something. If I wanted to go to bed at a certain time, if I preferred something. So I couldn't see these preferences before until I started dropping into this idea of my cooler self. And then stuff started to become clear. I started to see all the incongruencies, the things that didn't make sense in my life when I was using the perfect girlfriend model of living my life. That didn't make any sense anymore. And I started to see how much it was affecting me and how much it wasn't helping. And so I was thinking about my cooler self and I was like, you know what? It was like a day off. It was the weekend. We're just chilling at home. And I noticed that I had this vision of my cooler self sitting at a cafe, writing in her journal. And at first, all the normal thoughts came in where I was thinking, why do you gotta leave the house? He's here. You guys are hanging out together, even though we're not. He's over there doing his own thing. You can just journal at your desk. Why do you gotta leave? Why do you gotta go pay for a coffee? Why do you gotta be so extra? All these judgments. And then I thought about my cooler self. I thought about my muses. I thought about how cool that is. And then I did the weirdest thing where I got dressed in a way that I felt good in. And then I walked out the door and went to a cute cafe that I was thinking of, got myself a coffee and sat there by myself at the window with the jazz music playing and the smell of the cafe. And I was journaling there for about an hour. And just that alone, giving myself that weird experience. And the hardest part about that was walking out the door, right? The hardest part often is us leaving the house when our partners are still there. That felt so weird. That was the hardest part. I was like, am I going to do this? Oh my God. Okay, bye. I'm just going to go to the cafe for a little bit. I'll be back. And he's like, okay, bye. And then once I was out the door and walking there, I felt pretty good. I was like, I'm doing it. Okay, I'm being more of what's aligned with me. And then I'm sitting there and I'm having my coffee and it's just a different environment. And I'm getting a chance to experience being a version of myself that I was actually attracted to and felt cool and liked being. So just the ability to show myself that, to give myself that new experience, and to have this tailored experience that made sense to me, and to give myself that, it was mind-blowing. Even though it sounds so simple, and so much of the things that you're going to do is going to sound so simple that you almost want to write it off, but you have to amplify this for yourself. And just the experience of it and seeing that I had the power to elevate myself, to make myself feel good about myself, just by doing more things that made sense to me and actually listening to myself and not being at war with myself and doing things that were uncomfortable and trying hard, but for myself instead of someone else. It was a whole experience. And so what was going on here was that I was creating a purpose, an inspiration, a way of self-actualizing, a whole life beyond the relationship. And I talk about self-actualization in episode 2 and why humans are drawn to this and why we need this. But yeah, it was that I wasn't just relying on the relationship to make me feel like I was becoming this person, becoming my higher self, becoming self-actualized. I wasn't just relying on him and the relationship to make me feel that way. I was starting to see bits and pieces of how I could do it on my own. And this was so empowering because I showed myself that there is something beyond the relationship. There's something that I will still have, even if he's not around, even if something goes wrong. There's still more of me out there. I have a purpose. I have an insight. I have an inspiration towards who I most want to be, this cooler version of myself who has so much more opportunities and possibilities out there beyond just being an amazing partner. All the joy doesn't disappear the moment he walks out the door. It is there within me when I start to have this vision of this cooler self that I'm meant to become more of and follow. I had a path. I now saw the light of where there is an alternative way of life while being in a relationship. And so I want to let you know that this didn't happen overnight. This took a lot of inner practice and exploration and patience and trying. But I want you to think about it. It's like an addiction. We are addicted to the validation of our partners, of getting it outside of ourselves. So when we're trying to reroute and do a new life, there's going to be a moment of detoxing, and that is normal. It's going to take time. You're going to have to detox your system from all the bad habits, the habitual thinking, the orienting our attention towards the partners. We are rerouting and reprogramming ourselves to be this new way. So it's not supposed to happen overnight. Even though you intellectually understand it, it doesn't mean that we are automatically going to change ourselves. We can intellectually grasp it, but we're still going to have to practice it. And we're going to slip back into bad habits and patterns and old ways of being. And that's normal. We are detoxing, shedding a little bit of it every day, reprogramming ourselves. My goal was simply to experience what it was like to be more of who I liked being. That was the whole goal, to get to experience more and more what it would be like to be the person that I felt was cool and that I felt attracted to being. That was the only goal. The goal wasn't to have this impossible standard and to be perfect. Nope, absolutely not. My coolest self is actually pretty imperfect. She's a human being. She's artsy. She's got her own flaws. She's interesting. She's complex. So she's not perfect. She's not going to be this impossible standard. So that wasn't the goal. Neither was the goal to affect my boyfriend or the relationship, which was unprecedented. Before, everything was just like, well, is this going to make us better together? Is this going to improve things? How does he feel? No, the whole goal was, did I get to experience a version of myself that I felt good being? Right? It's not about him and the relationship. And it was not to feel comfortable. A lot of the things like going to hang out with friends, even though it felt more inspired and more true to what I wanted, it didn't feel comfortable. It didn't feel comfortable to walk out the door and go and do this thing on my own when I'm like, oh, well, what time is he coming home? I mean, should I come back then? What is he? It felt weird and different because it was something I normally did not do. It was out of my comfort zone. It felt really weird. And then I had to show myself that I was fine, that the discomfort is worth it, that discomfort is part of it. And to not make the discomfort mean that it's not right or that I'm doing something wrong or that this is not the right thing to do. It is supposed to feel uncomfortable when you're doing something different. That's all it was. So I didn't make it mean anything wrong. In fact, I just focused like through the discomfort when I'm hanging out with friends or doing something different. I was like, oh, I'm getting to experience being a version of myself that is different and feels more aligned with who I want to be, which means I'm succeeding. Because that's the goal, to just get to experience a version of yourself that you feel more cool and aligned and attracted to being. I was like, do I feel more attracted to myself when I'm going and hanging out with friends, even though it's uncomfortable and different, than how I would feel towards myself if I was just moping about at home, waiting for him to walk in the door so my life will be better? I'm like, yeah, I am a lot more attracted to the idea of me going out and having my own life. So that was good. It wasn't about how comfortable it was, how fun it was, that kind of thing. It was about, was I able to give myself that experience? What kept me going was that this was required because self-love was the one thing I hadn't tried yet to improve the relationship, to improve everything. So that kept me going. I'm like, this is the one thing I haven't tried. I have to try it to know that I gave it my all. I gave this relationship my all, and if it fails, I know I tried my best. But it started to shift into something a lot more nourishing and feeling good from the inside once I started to realize I am able to be this version of myself that I'm more attracted to. And I started to like myself. I started to feel this inner peace, this quiet love towards myself, appreciation. It felt like everything was starting to make sense. So once it starts to transform into that, it's no longer driven by this fear of losing the relationship. It is driven by how good and true it feels in comparison to how you were doing everything before. And so the result in both cases of me doing this was that in the unhealthy relationship, even when it felt so hard and so painful, like just throwing everything up into the air and everything was falling apart and my life was a mess, I had got to the point where I felt enough inner confidence and having my own life beyond the relationship and knowing who I was beyond the relationship, I got there just enough to be able to leave. To be able to say, this is not healthy and this is so hard, but I'm going to say we cannot do this anymore. That was so difficult, but again, the only reason why I was finally able to do that for myself was because I worked on having this goal, this vision, this inspiration of my cooler self beyond the relationship. And when I did this in my healthy, good relationship that I'm still in right now, I basically saved it because I was going down this path where I was being a version of myself I knew was not attractive, even though I was trying so hard to be attractive. And I was falling into old patterns. And for me to start to do this and reroute and have my own self and personality outside the relationship and have a mission outside the relationship and a vision outside the relationship, it saved it. I began showing up in such a different way, more self-love, less needy, more inspiration and life in myself without requiring things to be a certain way, it changed everything. So, do you see that this is the missing piece? That you having a clearer vision of who your cooler self is, when you're doing it for yourself, when you're doing this cooler self and living for your coolest self, that is the missing piece. That's what changes everything. And this is what I help you do. If you are serious about this, come coach with me an Identity Love year. I can help you do this in such a powerful, fast, empowered way. And there's nothing more immersive in being your own true self than having a coach there with you, guiding you along the way, supporting you along the way, giving you all the insight along the way, along with all the wisdom that you're already getting from what you notice and are inspired by in your own life. Just want to say that. That is my specialty. That's what I do for you. But just for you to know this, for you to see that how this works, and pointing your compass and doing little doable things in accordance to that person is what is going to lead to the self-love, to the less neediness, less jealousy, more life. The answer, the solution is found within the things that you are naturally attracted to, that you are inspired by, that feels good and easy for you. And that is the path towards solving pretty much everything that you're struggling with right now in your relationship and in yourself. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Have an amazing, inspired, identity-loving rest of your week, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.